This is Flexy, a flexible version of Theo Jansen's Strandbeest mechanism. It operates using flexures instead of joints. So we can compress in either direction this main parallelogram in order to get it to move. It's a flexure that I've been working on in order to make a more simplified version of some of the other mechanisms that I've made. The idea here is to have a structure that you want to be able to change shape. In this case, this square, which then can become a parallelogram in either direction. Normally, with the square, you end up with a 90-degree bend where you go from one direction into the next for the structure. And that change is often far too dramatic for a normal bending force to survive, for the structure to survive. That structure can survive sometimes, but over many different compressions and expansions, that corner will often be the breaking point for a square structure. So instead, what I decided to do was kind of make this loop-de-loop that happens here. And so what you have is a helix where it's kind of like a spiral staircase as it goes from one level up to the next. And that allows you to mitigate the amount of stress that would normally accumulate in that corner. So by having all 4 points have that, this shape can bend in either direction. And what you can see is when we compress it, these loops compress. And when we expand it in the other direction, those loops expand while these compress. So there's this dual sort of action that happens in the corners where we have expansion and compression happening throughout the structure at the same time. And then most of the stresses are forced into these corners because these regions I've made thicker than the regions here in our cloverleaf sort of turn. So that's my way in this case of avoiding stresses building up that eventually just destroy the structure because of plastic bending that the structure can't survive. So I also have loop-de-loops in these regions, and those are just for control. Normally the Jansen linkage is held at this point, and then this moves in a circular fashion in order to create the walking motion that the foot eventually needs in order to become a walking structure. And unfortunately, the forces aren't as transmissible in this structure as in regular Jansen linkages that require joints, because it won't transmit that extreme sort of movement that the Jansen linkage does when you have regular sorts of hinges. But this still does the motion that a Jansen linkage would do, but in a normally more, or in a more subtle, smaller range of motion. So eventually I want to take these legs, build up a whole bunch of them, and then have them walk together so that it could have its, sort of, so it can essentially become a Strandbeest, much like the Strandbeest that Theo Jansen works on. The other aspect that you get when you make a structure like this is that it can be printed all in one piece. So none of this is glued. All of these are printed with supports in some places and with no support in other places. But it's printed as one structure. So there was no assembly that was required. I just had to pull off some supports in order to make it work the way I wanted. So that was a convenient thing for the 3D printing era that we live in right now. The other aspect of energy transmission through this type of structure is that in a normal Strandbeest that would have multiple legs in conjunction, one after the other, and opposing it as well, the mirror image here of a leg, you have to have some ability for each leg to communicate energy to the other legs. And in a normal Strandbeest, that's done through a crankshaft. But if I were to use flexures entirely, I wouldn't have the ability to use a crankshaft, because a crankshaft typically has a full 360 range of motion, and flexures, even if they have like from 0 to 360, they're not able to loop over entirely the way a hinge might loop, and a crankshaft depends on that. So this is my version of a crankshaft, and it looks pretty funky, but this is one center of crank. So what we have is a double spiral that we now have the ability to create motion in this direction with that spiral either compressing or expanding. And then in this direction, we have spirals on this side and on this side holding that inner spiral. And that allows us to create a 360 degree range of motion for this guy traveling in a circle, and this one traveling in a circle, as well as the opposite version of that circle. So as this one's turning, the other one is also turning, and we can connect one leg of the Strandbeest to the other leg of the Strandbeest entirely with flexures, and not have to depend on a crankshaft that is conventional. And the challenge to use flexures is just because I like them. There's a lot easier ways to make a Strandbeest. But I like the idea of making an entire robot all in one 3D print. And this wouldn't quite be possible. This one did have a lot of gluing to optimize for the fact that most things that are printed flat are often much stronger on a 3D printer. And so this was a separate piece, and this was a separate piece, and so on. And because of that, this does require assembly. It's not a perfectly print-in-place structure. And so, yeah, so these would be connected. That's what would be creating the rotary force. This part would be part of the skeleton of it and would be stationary, and the rest would move, and we would have a conjoined sets where there's one of these, then another, then another, then another, along with all the legs that would connect them all and cause the motion to be transmitted. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to all my patrons who make this possible. I'm sorry this video came out a little slow. I'm still getting used to being in a new state and a new setting. So thank you, everybody, and make sure to be kind to yourself.